So as Paola said, my name is Jessica Cruz. I'm Information Content Manager at Mind. So I work in Mind's information team, and we produce information on a range of different mental health problems and experiences and support options. So in terms of what we're going to be talking about in today's session, I'll give an overview of Mind's services and what's available from Mind, and then I'll be talking you through some of our information with a particular focus around supporting your own mental health as a carer and also supporting the mental health of someone that you're caring for. You've kindly pre-submitted some questions, which I've incorporated into the presentation, but as I say, there'll be time for a few more questions at the end. If there's any questions that I'm not able to answer, either if we don't have time or if it's something that I want to kind of check a bit more and answer more fully afterwards, then I'll make sure to come back to you after the session. And I'll be sharing a copy of these slides afterwards, so you'll have all the content, and there's quite a few links in some of the slides, so you'll have all the links as well to our website. So just to kind of make a few notes around kind of looking after ourselves during this session before we get into the content. So as you know, we are going to be talking about mental health today. Some of the questions that came in were around supporting someone who's feeling suicidal or experiencing a crisis. So we will be touching on that. And these are difficult things to talk about. So if at any point you feel like you need to take a break from the session, please do. Please take care of yourself. And it's absolutely fine if you need to step away if any of the content feels difficult, and I'll kind of mention when a slide is going to be talking about suicidal feelings, for example. If you're asking questions, or if you're reflecting on what's been said, you might want to share some of your personal experience, and you're really welcome to do that. Please only share what you feel comfortable with, though, and there's absolutely no pressure to share. And we'll be respectful of what each other shares, and we'll kind of remember that we're all here to learn, and that's me included as well, in terms of hearing what's important to you. Questions are really welcome, no such thing as a silly question, and if there's anything else that you'd kind of like me to bear in mind in terms of keeping this space as comfortable as possible, please do pop anything in the chat. And Paola, I'm not able to see the chat when I'm showing the slides, so feel free to interrupt me if anything comes up that you'd like me to be aware of. Great, so I'll just move on. So firstly, to give you just a quick overview of the whole. So Mind is a mental health charity, and we work across England and Wales to help people experiencing mental health problems to get support and respect. So we do this through providing information, which is the team I sit in. We also campaign to improve services and to promote understanding. And a key part of that is trying to destigmatise mental health problems. And we've come a long way in some respects in that, and we're talking a lot more openly about mental health in some ways, but we know there's a lot more that we can do, and a lot further that we can go, particularly around destigmatizing maybe kind of less common mental health problems. So as well as our information and advice and campaigning, we also have a federated network of local minds. So I work in National Mind, but we also have this network of local minds who are independent organisations, but they're affiliated to National Mind, and they provide services in their local area. So in terms of the services that Mind offers specifically, so as I've mentioned, we have local minds. So they offer services that talking therapies or support groups, and that kind of depends on the particular local mind in your area. We've also got a couple of helplines. So we have an info line, which offers signposts to support in the area, and also kind of general information about mental health problems. We also have a legal line, which offers general advice on mental health law, including the Mental Health Act. So, for example, if someone was sectioned, that legal line could offer some general advice around kind of what that would involve and what rights you might have if you're going through that experience. And then the contact details are on the slides, which I'll share, and they're available over the phone, but also over email and sometimes on the web chat as well via our website. We've also got an online peer support community, so that's called side by side online, and it's an online forum where people can share their experiences of mental health and with people who are going through similar things, and both kind of offer and receive support as well. And as I say, I work in our information team, so we produce information online on our website and also in print, and we aim to kind of help people understand their experiences and their options for support so that they can make informed choices and understand their rights as well. So the aim being to create person-centered information on all aspects of living with mental health problems. So the team that I work in, we focus on information for adults, so that's aged over 18. So that will be the focus of what I talk about today. But we do also have information for young people aged 11 to 18. So what I'm going to do now really quickly is I'm just going to, hopefully, if the tech allows, quickly screen share our website and just give you a quick tour of some of the pages on the website, which might be helpful to kind of look at a bit more after the sessions. So let's see if I can do this quickly. Bear with me. So
just a quick question we had on the chat from Mary. She's asking if there is an equivalent to Mind in Scotland and Northern Ireland.
Yeah, so in Scotland, there's an organisation called SAMH, and I'll just make a quick note to send, when I send the slides, I'll send a link to them. In Northern Ireland, I will double check and I will come back to you. So, actually, Paolo, would you mind just making a note of that for me, and I'll make sure
yes, of course.
That in the follow-up.
I will, thank you.
That would be, yeah, I can include links and make sure that I get the kind of most relevant organisation for Northern Ireland as well. Thank you, that's a really good question. So I'm just going to share my screen of the website. Okay. Hopefully you can now see our homepage of the Mind website. Please do shout anyone if you can't. So just to kind of give you a really quick tour of where to look if you're looking for our information. So this is the Mind homepage, mind.org.uk. The best place to start is to go to information and support. And then there's quite a few options here for finding relevant information depending on what you're experiencing. So just to reach the young people's information, although that won't be the main focus of the talk, we have a young people's information hub, and that is for young people aged 11 to 18. And we've got information for young people themselves, but also for young people supporting another young person, be that a friend or a partner, and information for parents and carers as well. So I'll quickly show you some of the parents and carers information in case that's relevant to anyone on the call. Of course, my internet has been very slow now. So a page that might be particularly helpful to take a look at if you are supporting a young person is around talking to a young person about their mental health. We've got some suggestions on this page around kind of signs that you might want to look out for in terms of a young person may be experiencing poor mental health, and then some tips around starting a conversation and also around how to be a good listener, and some points around if someone doesn't want to talk about their mental health, and that question around kind of what to do or how to be supportive if someone doesn't want to seek help right now or kind of doesn't want to talk about mental health right now is something we'll talk about a little bit more later in the session as well. So yeah, so all of these links are applicable, and you can go to tips on each of those points. And there's quite a few other pages for young people that you can take a look through as well. We also have, in terms of our adult information, the easiest way of navigating that is to look at our A to Z. So that includes kind of all of our information pages listed alphabetically, and it includes pages around different treatment options, so things like medication, for example, information about specific mental health problems, and wider points as well around getting support, for example, through advocacy. We have some specific information for carers as well, which might be something that you want to explore after the session, and there'll be links provided in the slides. So looking at things like kind of difficult feelings that you might experience as a carer, support options, and tips for looking after yourself, and we'll go through some of those tips a bit later as well. And then kind of specific tips around supporting someone with a mental health problem. And we have information about kind of supporting someone with any mental health problem, the kind of general themes that are useful to consider. But then we've also got pages with specific tips related to specific mental health problems. So just to give a quick example, if we look at our information about hearing voices, sorry that my internet is taking so long to load. When I was practicing this was all much quicker. So as you can see here, we've got a specific friends and family page, which gives specific tips around supporting someone who's hearing voices. There's also other pages on the side here about hearing voices, the experience of hearing voices more generally. These pages are directed towards someone who is going through that experience themselves, but it can be useful also for friends and family to take a look at those just to get a wider understanding of what someone might be going through. But in terms of then tips for friends and family, there's some quite specific ones for hearing voices around kind of talking about the experience being real for that person, even if that's not something that's real for you, thinking about how that person is feeling about the experience and focusing on those feelings and not necessarily focusing on the content of what is someone is hearing in the voices, because that can be very personal. So for each of our pages on different mental health problems, we have some specific tips for friends and family. So if that is something that you wanted to explore, if that's something that you are supporting someone with at the moment, then just to recap, you go to A to Z mental health, and then you could go to a specific mental health problem and find the specific tips there. So I'll just stop sharing that and go back to my slides. And Jane, thank you very much for putting the SAMH link in there. That's brilliant, thank you. Lovely. Okay. So hopefully you can now see a slide called Seeking Help. Please do say if you can't. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of some of the options that you might want to consider if you're seeking help for a mental health problem, or equally if you're supporting someone else to seek help. And I guess kind of what I want to acknowledge before going into these, that I'm conscious that people in this room attending might be on very different stages of a journey. So some of you might, not have sought help for mental health before. Some of you might have tried a lot of these things before. So for some of you, this might be more of a recap, but hopefully still helpful. And if there's kind of extra questions that we can delve into at the end, then that would be great. But so just to give a kind of quick overview of the general options. So firstly, just to say it can be really hard to know where to start when you're seeking help, and it can be difficult to know when to seek help, or whether you should be kind of hitting certain criteria or struggling a certain amount before you reach help. But our kind of message is that it's always all right to ask for support, even if you're not sure that you're experiencing mental health problems. Generally we'd be thinking, if you're finding that you're worrying more than usual, or you're having thoughts and feelings that are difficult to cope with and having an impact on your day-to-day life, then you might want to start thinking about whether you want to seek some support. And sometimes we say, if those kind of things have been going on for 2 weeks or more, then you might want to seek help. But at the same time, you don't need to wait for that. You don't need to be really struggling for 2 weeks before you reach out. It's really okay to reach out at any point. And there's various options, but there's no kind of one right order to try them in. But one first possible step is to talk to your GP, who is there to support with your mental health as much as your physical health. And your GP would listen to your experiences much as they would do with your physical health. And it might help, much as you might do for your physical health appointments, to kind of write things down in advance, maybe prepare what you want to say, and maybe think about what you'd like to get out of the appointment. Depending on what you discuss in the appointment, the GP might make a diagnosis. They might offer support and treatment options such as talking therapies or medication, or they might recommend local support options, or depending on what you share, if you were kind of struggling quite a lot and maybe experiencing quite difficult symptoms, then they might consider referring you to a specialist such as a psychiatrist. But what's really important is that all of those options should be provided to you in a way that you understand. So, for example, you're entitled to ask for that information in writing if it's not clear. You're entitled to bring someone with you to an appointment to help you get clarity in an appointment. And really importantly, the GP should make sure that you're able to give informed consent for any treatment that they offer before treating you. So that means that you, for example, understand the potential benefits and risks of what you're agreeing to, and that you understand what you're agreeing to as well. And that's particularly important, for example, with medication, because we know that lots of people have very different experiences of psychiatric medication. So some of us will find that it's helpful, and some of us will find that it's not, and that we experience very difficult side effects. And it's important that your GP is there to help you weigh up those benefits and risks. And we've got quite a lot of information on the website around particularly around medication, kind of things that you might want to ask your doctor if that is something that you're being offered. So, and we've got lots of more information on our website about speaking to your GP in general. And if you go to that A to Z that I showed you, there's overarching information about seeking help for a mental health problem. So alongside or instead of talking to your GP, you could also try charity and third sector organisations, and they might provide a range of services depending on their setup. So that could include listening services such as the Samaritans, who are there to kind of help you talk through your feelings and experiences without judging you and without telling you what to do. It's different from kind of talking therapies where you'd kind of have a number of sessions with a trained professional, and listening service would be a bit more kind of a one-for a conversation when you really need to speak to someone right now. Some organisations will also offer information about mental health problems. So of course Mind does that, but there's also charities which specialise in particular mental health problems. So for example, the charity Beat offers support on eating problems. There's the Hearing Voices Network. Young Minds offers support for young people and parents, and there's many more organisations that specialise in that particular information for specific mental health problems. And some organisations might also have support groups as well for you to share experiences with other people going through the same thing. And in terms of finding those services, if you wanted to try finding those services via Mind, then one option would be to call Mind's info line, which the details are on the previous slide, because they can signpost you to support available to you. And that won't just be Mind services, that will be any kind of service that specialises in what you're experiencing. On our information pages as well, each of our pages about different mental health problems has a page called Useful Contacts, which is a list of organisations that might be able to support with that specific experience. And then we've also got our local Minds as well, who do provide support in local areas. And we've got information on the website as well around accessing talking therapies, including kind of accessing talking therapies through a charity, for instance, or also kind of options around private talking therapy, although that isn't an option for many of us because of the expense. But there's quite a few options there on the website about kind of thinking through how to access talking therapy and things you might want to consider when you're first meeting a therapist, and kind of working out, you know, is this therapist right for me, and how to get the most out of the sessions as well. So something that's really important in knowledge when we're talking about these options is to be really honest that this process of seeking help isn't always easy. And that's particularly the case when we're not feeling well. And it can take time, and it might not be straightforward. For example, you know, there are waiting lists for services, or if you are able to access a service, but it's not, you know, delivered in a way that's quite right for you, and that can be really tricky and distressing if you're not getting the support you need. And it is something that we hear a lot, and what we'd really kind of want to encourage people to do is to, you know, remember that you're not alone in this, and that we are campaigning for improvements, and that you do deserve support even if it's not forthcoming right now. We'd encourage people to kind of keep trying explore their options if they can. But we know sometimes our energy is not going to allow for that, and sometimes we might need to focus on self-care for a bit if kind of that process of trying to seek support is too difficult. If you're able to, something that you might want to consider if you are struggling to kind of be heard by services is to consider the support of an advocate. So that's someone who can help you express your needs and wishes to services, and help you to understand to help you assert your rights as well. We've got information about advocacy on the website and how to potentially access an advocate. But we are aware that there's much more support that is needed, and many improvements are needed to the support available, and we're campaigning to improve this, and you can become a campaigner with us as well if that's something that you're interested in. So that was a quick summary of kind of some of the options around seeking help for mental health problems. I'm going to now move on to a slide where we're going to briefly talk about getting help in a crisis. So this is going to reference suicidal feelings. So just to kind of give that a bit of a warning, if you did want to step back for this slide, that's absolutely fine. I'll just take a moment before I move on. Okay. So, in terms of getting help in a mental health crisis, I think firstly it's helpful just to think about what we are defining as a mental health crisis. So this is quite a broad term, and it's kind of when you feel like you're at breaking point and you need urgent help. So for example, you might be feeling suicidal and be concerned that you feel like you might take your own life. You might be self-harming and have seriously harmed yourself. You might be experiencing very strong or severe symptoms of anxiety, for example, or mania or psychosis, and you might feel that you really need urgent help right now. In terms of the kind of advice that we would give if this is what someone's experiencing, if someone is concerned that they might attempt suicide or they've seriously harmed themselves, the quickest way to get help is to call 999 or to go to the nearest A&E if you're able to do that. If someone felt that they could keep themselves safe for a short while but still needed urgent advice, some of the options would be to contact NHS 111, try and get a GP emergency appointment, although we know that is challenging. Or in England, there is an option of trying to contact an urgent mental health helpline. And when I send around the slides, the link on this slide has links to accessing urgent mental health helplines. There's kind of a search function that you can use. I guess going one step down is if you're feeling like you can keep yourself safe, but you do feel like you need to talk to someone about how you're feeling. So you might not need advice as such, but you need to be expressing how you're feeling with who's not going to judge you. Then one option here is around contacting a listening service. So I mentioned Samaritans, available over the phone, also available over email. There's also Shout if you prefer a text messaging option, and that sometimes that might be the only option if you need to be contacting someone more privately. So there's that text messaging option with Shout. We've also got some coping tools on our website which have some activities which you could use to kind of help distract yourself and possibly delay things if you're kind of feeling a very strong urge to self-harm, for example. We have some activities that you can try to kind of get through the next 2 minutes, get through the next 5 minutes and delay and then hopefully be in a position to seek support. So so the link on the slide kind of goes through all of those suggestions in more detail if you're experiencing a crisis, and we'll also a little bit later touch on supporting someone else who's in crisis briefly as well. So we had a couple of questions come in around seeking support for mental health, and one of the questions that came in was around alternative therapies, and the question was, what does Mind think about alternative therapies? And a particular example given was Tai Chi. So here at Mind, what we try and do is we try and give people information that they need to make the choices about what treatment and support feels right for them and what they want to explore. So generally, we wouldn't kind of actively recommend one treatment over the other, but we want to let people know what the possible benefits and risks might be of a particular treatment, and key questions to ask a treatment provider before starting that treatment, and kind of options or suggestions around how to access that treatment as well. So we've got a lot of information actually on our website about different complementary and alternative therapies, and that includes safety considerations, what the current evidence says about how and whether they work, and suggestions for accessing them as well. So that does include information about Tai Chi, and what we've found is that the evidence does suggest that it can be beneficial for supporting people who are experiencing low mood, and it can support with general well-being as well. And it could also offer some support with physical health conditions. There are some precautions to consider depending on your own health. So, for example, if you experience back pain, or if you're pregnant, for example. So there's things to consider before starting it. And we'd recommend taking a look at our information on these therapies kind of before starting on one. And if you go to our A to Z, there's the link there. And yeah, so overall, we kind of, when we're looking at different treatments, we look at kind of what do clinical studies say, but then also what do people with lived experience say about kind of whether they found it helpful, and we combine those to kind of lay out all the evidence and say, this is what people feel about it, and this is kind of how you might want to go about accessing it and considering it if you wanted to. Another question that we had around support options was about mental health. And so we find that a lot of people do find that being creative helps their mental health, and it can be helpful to express how you're feeling creatively, for example, through painting or drawing or dancing or baking. And something that we try and encourage people to do is to maybe not worry too much about what the finished product looks like, and more focus on the time that you're spending to create something. One of my colleagues at the moment is teaching some of us how to cross stitch, and I'm halfway through some cross stitch, and I'm pretty sure my final piece is not going to be that great, but I've really enjoyed the process, and I'm trying to focus on that. So yeah, and that's been helpful just to take a bit of time for myself. We've got some quite a few kind of lived experience accounts on our website in blogs around how people have found creative activities helpful for them. But as well as that kind of more informal approach, it is also possible to try creative activities more formally with a therapist. And so that's what we'd call arts and creative therapies. And the aim of these therapies is to help you communicate thoughts and feelings that you might find difficult to put in words, help you kind of make sense of what you're going through, and also to give you a safe time and place to express things with someone who won't judge you. And those sessions could take place in a one-to-one setting or a group. And in terms of the evidence for whether that helps, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, and NICE, the NICE guidelines recommend that arts therapies can be helpful and should be considered for everyone who experiences psychosis or schizophrenia. The research also suggests that arts and creative therapies might help with other mental health problems as well, but the studies so far have been really small, so we kind of welcome more research in that area to give us a bit more evidence, but we do hear a lot anecdotally about how this does help. And in terms of kind of accessing those more formal arts and creative therapies in the UK, the kinds of therapies that you might come across would be dance movement therapy, drama therapy, music therapy, and visual art therapy are the kind of four main ones that you might come across. And if you are looking to start something like that, we suggest having a look as to whether the therapist that you're reaching out to is part of a relevant professional body. And we've got information on the website about kind of what those bodies might be and how therapists are regulated. Availability does vary, and in some areas it might only be available privately, which of course is not an option for all of us. But there are some suggestions on our website for maybe trying to find those services possibly free or low cost. For example, some of our local mines offer those services. So that is kind of an overview of some of the support options and points around seeking help and your questions around seeking help. So now I'm just going to move on to a few slides around supporting someone else. Paula, I can't see my clock, and I just wondered if you could let me know the time to make sure I'm not running over.
Yes, that's fine, no problem. Yeah, it's 11:35, so.
Okay, great. Okay, I'll speed up slightly.
No problem, that's fine. Take your time.
Great. Okay, so this is then a few slides around supporting someone else who's experiencing a mental health problem. So similar to the kind of acknowledgement around seeking help, similar with this and supporting someone else, a lot of you in the audience might be kind of at different stages with this. You might be supporting someone at the moment. You might have tried lots of things already, or this might be, something that you haven't had to experience yet. So I know that kind of some of these suggestions are going to feel more or less doable at different times. You might be trying a lot of these things already and not feeling like you're getting anywhere with that, and that's a really common feeling. And we'd encourage you to kind of be kind to yourself if any of these suggestions maybe aren't working right now. But generally, in terms of kind of overall support for someone who's experiencing a mental health problem, there are a few themes that we would suggest. So there's a really key one around allowing space for someone to talk about their mental health. And sometimes we might feel like it's more appropriate or safer to kind of avoid the conversation, but actually kind of allowing space and letting someone know that they can speak to you about their mental health if they want to is useful, if you feel able and in a position to hear it. At the same time, it's also fine to have space to talk about other things and to kind of let the person know that that mental health isn't the only aspect of their life. There's also something around kind of asking how you can help, because people are going to want different support at different times. So some people might want that more emotional support and that listening ear if that's something you feel able to give. Others might want that more practical support around keeping track of medication, for example, or giving support at a doctor's appointment. And something that can help with this as well is around finding out what you can about a person's experience, and looking at our information can be a good start. And we've got specific tips as well, as I mentioned, around particular mental health problems, but those would be some general themes around supporting someone else that we would consider. One of the questions that we received was around supporting someone who is feeling suicidal. So again, just to give a bit of a warning that the next slide is going to be talking about suicidal feelings in a bit more depth. So I'll just pause for a moment there, just in case anyone needs to take a break before I move on to that. Okay, I'll just move on now. So a question that we had was around supporting an autistic person who's experiencing suicidal feelings. And we know that, supporting anyone who's experiencing suicidal feelings, or if you're worried that someone is experiencing this, is very difficult and worrying experience. Although we don't have specific tips on supporting an autistic person experiencing suicidal feelings, we'd still recommend some of these tips, and we've done some work with the National Autistic Society to kind of support with their information as well. So firstly, kind of just thinking about if someone is really in crisis right now. So if someone has attempted suicide, just kind of going back to the slide before around supporting yourself in crisis, the quickest way to get help is to call 999 and to stay with the person until the ambulance arrives. If they haven't attempted suicide, but you're very concerned that they might try, and that you feel they're at immediate risk of taking their own life, then if you feel able to, and if you feel safe to do so, you can try and remove things that person could use to harm themselves. But the most important element is around contacting 999 and getting emergency help, and staying with that person if you can. But stepping back from those instances of immediate risk, and looking more at suicidal feelings more generally, this can be something that is really difficult to cope with if you're worried about someone. In terms of things that you can try, encouraging someone to talk about their feelings, if you feel able to listen to it, is can be really helpful. And, you know, particularly with suicidal feelings, it can feel nerve-wracking to bring it up, and there's sometimes a worry that if we ask a direct question about whether someone is having suicidal thoughts, that might actually make things worse, and maybe kind of encourage it. And actually what the research suggests is actually no, asking direct questions about it and enabling someone to talk about the topic if they want to is actually helpful, and asking really simple and direct questions can encourage someone to be honest about how they're feeling, and often people will feel relieved and less isolated when they're asked. Depending on kind of what someone shares with you and whether you feel able to, something else to consider is around encouraging someone to seek treatment and support. So kind of going back to the previous slide around, listening services or GP or an urgent mental health helpline, conscious that this isn't always going to be doable and someone isn't always going to want support, and we'll touch on that on the next slide. Depending again on the experience, you might want to consider helping them think of ideas that they can look after themselves as well, ideas for self-help. So, for example, this could include thinking about, what techniques might help them. So if we're thinking about self-harm, for example, are there any delaying techniques or distraction techniques that might help? So one example of a kind of distraction technique is around holding an ice cube in your hand until it melts and focusing on how cold it feels, which is a kind of way to focus on your senses and kind of ground yourself a little bit. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a couple of slides. And then kind of stepping back again, so when someone isn't kind of actively feeling challenged by suicidal feelings, but kind of they know that is something that they have struggled with, it could help to make us with for more difficult times. So that could include thinking about what's helped before, kind of then, what can we then remember to try again if someone does struggle again, who kind of could support that person and doing what, and also who could be contacted in an emergency. And something else that might be helpful to consider is what someone's warning signs are. So when they're starting to struggle, kind of what are the kind of things that you might be able to look out for, and that they might be able to look out for in themselves as well. In terms of more specific information, specifically around supporting autistic people, there is information from the National Autistic Society with a link on the slide there. And we've done some work with the National Autistic Society supporting some of their information. And that includes a guide for services about how to adapt talking therapy services to better meet the needs of autistic people. So you can take a look at that on the National Autistic Society website if that's something that isn't what you're going through right now. So moving on to then looking after or supporting someone who doesn't want help right now and doesn't feel maybe that they need help right now. This is another question that came in kind of pre-submitted, and it's a really, really tricky one, to be honest with you. It's absolutely understandable to feel powerless and frustrated if you know that someone is clearly struggling to you, but they don't feel in a position to seek help. I think the kind of in terms of what you're not able to do, what we're not able to do when that is the situation, is that we can't force someone to seek help. So if they're over 18 and it's not an emergency situation, it's not something that we can force. And we also can't speak to a doctor for someone else. So a doctor might give you general information about symptoms or diagnoses, but they won't be able to share specific advice or details about someone without their agreement. And this can be, really frustrating if you're really worried about someone. What you can do is let someone know that you are there for them if they do change their mind about seeking help, and kind of suggest ways in which they can seek help if they feel ready to. And that, kind of keeping that door open for if you are going to be, if they do change their mind, that you are going to be there to kind of support them with that. And kind of, looking out for warning signs if anyone is kind of maybe not feeling safe, and then thinking about, the crisis suggestions from the previous slide. But it is a really difficult one, and I think it's important for us to be honest about the limits of what we can do when someone is not in a position to seek that help, and kind of understand that we can still be there for that person and have that space for if they are ready to seek help. But it's also really, really important to take care of ourselves as much as we can, which leads us on to a final slide just around looking after yourself. So if you're experiencing a mental health problem yourself, I've mentioned kind of we've got information about specific mental health problems on the website, and that includes self-care suggestions as well. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of some of our key self-care tips which span many mental health experiences, and I'll touch as part of this on some of the points that people asked in pre-submitted questions about looking after yourselves as well. So one thing that's really helpful, although this might feel obvious, but it's something that can be tricky to make time for, is to understand your mental health. So it can help to think about what your own early warning signs are if you're starting to feel unwell, and if there are particular situations which you might find particularly difficult. For example, if you wanted to keep a very brief mood diary to kind of work out, when things are particularly difficult and when you really struggle with your feelings. It's not always feasible if difficult situations are coming up. It's not always feasible to avoid those situations, particularly depending on your responsibilities. But it might help to prepare for them and to know that they're coming, and to put in any support in place that you can. That could, for example, include talking to someone else about what you're struggling with, letting them know what would help you if you are in these difficult situations. And so I guess, a key thing here around looking after yourself is that it doesn't always have to go straight into kind of seeking that more formal support from a GP, for example. It can be really valuable to start with that first step of talking to someone in your life who you trust, if you feel able to. It might not be someone in your life, though. You can also try peer support and think about kind of talking to people who have gone through similar experiences as you. So, for example, as I mentioned, we have our online peer support community, Side by Side Online. And something that's really important to remember for that is that you don't have to have a specific mental health problem diagnosed to use a site like that. If you're struggling with your feelings at all, even if you're not sure if you have a mental health problem, that can be a space that you can go and talk about things that you're finding difficult, and you can kind of receive support from others, but also offer it as well. And we do find that on the Side by Side community, people do really give and take in a really lovely way. Physical health as well, looking after your physical health, this can be really hard to prioritize, especially if you're caring for someone else. But we do have some suggestions on our site around looking after yourself, including thinking about your diet and sleep, but also trying to be quite realistic around those. So particularly around diet, especially if we're feeling unwell, we're not always going to have time or energy or, the finances to cook, really beautiful meals from scratch all the time. So our information about food and mental health, we've actually recently updated to try and be a bit more realistic of, if you're really struggling right now, here's some kind of basics and some alternatives if you're not able to kind of cook fresh food every day if you're feeling really unwell. There's also some things to consider around relaxation. So we have a few relaxation exercises on our website, which you can kind of try at any time, and they take a few minutes. So there's things, for example, around focusing on your senses. So depending on what feels accessible for you, just kind of taking a moment to think about what you can see, or what you can hear, or what you can touch, or what you can smell, or what you can taste, just kind of to take you a little bit out of the situation without necessarily having to leave that situation, because that might not always be possible. Another option as well is to kind of focus on your breathing. So kind of breathing quite slowly in and out, counting to 4 in and 4 out, and having can help to have your hand on your tummy as well, just to feel your tummy going in and out, and just kind of be a bit focused on something else, and just kind of slow things down a little bit without kind of having to take a break from things, and something that you can kind of just use quite quickly. In terms of that relaxation as well, we had a question around coping with anxiety, and I'd suggest that those relaxation ideas might be good ones to try. But also the question that was pre-submitted asked about post-COVID anxiety specifically. This is a really tricky one, and there's a sense, I think, around since the pandemic has happened and is still happening, things feel really out of control, and I think it's really difficult when if lots of people are kind of, you know, moving on, so to speak, and maybe not talking about COVID as much anymore, but for lots of us we might still be shielding or looking after someone who's shielding, or, you know, still very vulnerable, and things aren't going to have moved on for all of us in many ways. So something that can help with this, and something that we kind of suggested during the kind of lockdowns as well, was thinking about what we can control. So kind of making a list. It sounds really simple, but just making a list of, okay, what can't I control? What can I control? And remembering that there are some things that are within your gift to control. And trying to focus on those as much as possible. If the anxiety that you're experiencing is feeling really, really severe, and so, for example, if you're experiencing panic attacks, we do have some specific tips around coping with panic attacks on the website, and they do include some of those kind of grounding techniques just to take yourself out of what you're going through, just at least temporarily. So that was quite a lot of content, I'm aware, and I hope we still have time for questions, but that brings us to the end of the formal part of the presentation, and I will send these slides round, but I'll stop sharing now and hopefully have time for some questions.